you can see the redacted portions, and they're significant on some of these pages, much like you saw in the Michael Flynn filing back with Jonathan Turley. As we're sifting through this, it seems like some of the redacted parts are lying about the fact and frequency of connections with, we don't know, redacted, falsely told investigators about, and it's electronic communications, and travel records. So obviously the special counsel is making a case here that they can't trust Manafort, and they're going to go back and he told multiple discernible lies, it says. These were not instances of mere memory lapses. If the defendant contends the government has not acted in good faith, the government is available to prove the false statements at a hearing, saying they have the evidence to back it up.
Right. First of all, we know that Paul Manafort is not very discerning. You know, he was nailed even before trial on the phone, essentially trying to influence witnesses. And that was a particularly moronic act, since you have to know that your phone is being monitored at that stage when you're under home confinement. And it does sound like this is it fulfills that pattern. They're suggesting that they have tapes and other proof that he directly lied. What I think is interesting about both these filings, though, is you have two individuals here, even Michael Cohen, who's clearly not giving the special counsel what he wants. And we've seen that with Corsi, we've seen that with Papadopoulos, that here you've got someone like Cohen over here who's cooperating across the board, but not enough. And the question is why? What is it that they want Cohen to say? And that, I think, fulfills the narrative of the White House, that Cohen is not exactly a discerning individual himself.
Well, in fact, the president has said he's a bold liar. He's tweeted that this guy lies all the time.
Yeah,
et cetera,
and Cohen's about as discerning as a jukebox. You know, anyone that puts a quarter in, he'll play the tune. And so here you've got this guy who has a bad reputation for saying anything that will help him, but not saying enough to please the special counsel. Now, what is really clear here, well, the Cohen aspect, and this is too late for Paul Manafort, who's going to be ground into a fine pumice, but it's clear with Cohen that this is not the end. For Cohen. They're dangling out what's called a 5K 1.1 letter, which is basically a cooperation letter. And they come back repeatedly and say, you don't have that letter. And so what they're doing is essentially turning this into a canned hunt. They're going to hit him with a sentence. The only way he's out of that cage is if he tells them what they want to hear. But that actually is concerning to me, because here's a guy who's obviously cooperating fully. They say he's credible. So what else did they want him to say?
Right.
And when you look at where the narrative breaks down, you begin to get an idea, you know, where Cohen says, look, nothing happened out of this contact with the Russians.
Yeah.
You know, nothing went forward. And one suspects that that wasn't good enough.
The question is where we go from here and whether this tells us anything about the roadmap ahead. Whether these documents suggest that this is coming to a head and could lead to a Mueller report in coming days, or whether this tells us there's a lot more yet to go for Mueller and the Southern District of New York.
Well, you know, the good money was always on a report being issued by the end of the year for one reason only. Mueller doesn't want to wait to issue a report to the Democratic House. That makes it look particularly bad. It would be better to issue at least the collusion part of the report by the end of the year. It's not clear if that's going to happen. But what is clear out of here, and we've known this for a couple weeks now, is that they are trying to bag Donald Trump. I mean, I know that may sound like, oh, how naive that is, but most of us assumed that the trail, if any trail that was there, it was long, cold, and barely discernible. In the last few weeks, we've seen Mueller pressuring witness after witness specifically to create a clear shot to Trump. And so what's appearing, the delay here, is they're seeing if they can get that final puzzle piece. The question is what that is. We know Mueller hasn't gotten what he wanted. The question is, has he gotten enough?
In this filing on Manafort, there are multiple references to this guy, Konstantin Kilimnik. He was referred to repeatedly in Manafort's trial in Virginia. Prosecutors said Kilimnik was basically based in Cyprus, also known as Dr. K, and helped Manafort complete what they said was his illegal financial transactions for many of shell companies in Cyprus. And they say that he lied about the fact and the frequency of his interactions with this guy. What we don't see is how this Kilimnik fits into a broader piece in a bigger puzzle.
No, this is a wonderfully colorful figure, including the common reference of Dr. K. It's something of 007, you know, in Cyprus, right? But every time we get to Dr. K, everything's blacked out, which indicates that there is ongoing investigations and possibly information they don't want Cohen to see. Because Cohen is in the dark here. You know, when you go for a proffer, when you go for immunity, you're given what's called a queen for a day. It seems like, according to these filings, he got a queen for 7 days, where he sat down at least 7 times to proffer what he knows. That's exposing you, by the way. People misunderstand that. Those statements can be used against you to some degree. Clearly in those meetings, he gave them a lot, which they're sort of begrudgingly acknowledging here. Not enough from the perspective of the New York prosecutors. And that's sort of interesting in itself, by the way, because the New York prosecutors are really the boots on the ground in terms of his crimes. They look very closely at Cohen, and they clearly don't like him, and they want him in jail for a significant period of time.
These prosecutors, both the special counsel's office and the Southern District of New York, are really putting the screws to these guys. And what I can't determine is whether they're getting what they're looking for, and is it painting this picture?
Well, they're clearly not, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
and so in the big picture, doesn't that seem like, if you're on the Trump team, you look at this and say, I mean, there's some here that we're concerned about, obviously.
Yeah, they should be concerned.
But is the big shoe dropping in these documents?
No, I think that actually there are positive aspects to this. Each of the tantalizing aspects about Russian contacts seem to die on the vine and go nowhere. So this is a sort of a speaking filing, and it doesn't say much about anything other than preliminary conversations and some frustration, obviously, that Cohen is not giving them more. So the question, I think, on a lot of people's minds is going to be, with this level of cooperation, what was the missing detail here for Cohen? Because he seems to have dropped a dime on everyone, but he didn't do enough. Now, as for Manafort, you know, he's gone. Now, the question is an intriguing one, whether Mueller played Manafort or whether Manafort played Mueller. I mean, because Mueller got a lot of information, but Manafort stopped that second trial from occurring, pled to 10 counts. He would have been convicted of more than that, cooperated so he can argue that to the judge, and still is making a play for a pardon.
Yeah, and that's a real question. And the president has said that it's still on the table about a pardon for Manafort. Speaking of which, the president, as we mentioned earlier, putting out that tweet saying it's totally cleared the president. Thank you, exclamation point, for reaction. And I guess that's all we're getting so far. John Roberts joins us from the North Lawn.